Sometimes it takes only a sliver of light in the darkest hour to reveal the truth we've ignored our whole lives. For Richard Blackwood, that light came from beneath his kitchen door at 2:16 a.m. The Blackwood estate stood silent as ever that night, impeccable in its perfection, stoic in its symmetry, hidden behind wrought iron gates and surrounded by manicured hedges. The mansion on Holloway Hill wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of habit, of grief left untouched, of decades spent polishing things that no longer needed polishing. Inside, the marble floors gleamed like still water. A grand chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, glittering even in the absence of guests. Music sometimes floated through the intercom, batch, list, but it sounded more like a memory than an invitation. And Richard, the man who owned it all, walked through his empire like a ghost in Kashmir. He was 61, a man whose name once moved markets and whose gaze once froze boardrooms. But tonight, he was simply thirsty. The kind of restlessness that settled in after midnight had returned, as it often did, and he found himself padding barefoot down the spiral staircase toward the kitchen. That's when he saw it. The light, a narrow golden sliver spilled across the hallway floor from under the kitchen door. That alone was strange. The staff was trained to disappear after 10 p.m. He paid them well to be invisible. The estate functioned like clockwork, seamless and precise. No one should have been awake at this hour, not unless something had gone wrong. Richard, still in his robe, walked slowly, not cautiously. He didn't believe in fear, just with the measured silence of someone who had lived too long in a house too quiet. He opened the door, expecting maybe a faulty fridge light or perhaps Simone, the new sous chef, forgetting to turn off the stove again. But it wasn't Simone. It was Elena Vasquez, his housekeeper. And she wasn't cooking or cleaning. She wasn't even aware he was there. She was studying. She sat at the massive marble island, wrapped in a grey sweater over her navy uniform, her elbows resting on a stack of battered textbooks. Her hair, always tightly pulled back during the day, now hung loosely down her back. A pencil was tucked behind her ear. Her lips moved silently as she mouthed words from the page in front of her. Richard stood motionless in the doorway. On the counter before her sat books far too advanced for a housekeeper. Human biology, systems of the body, intro to organic chemistry, and a hand-drawn diagram of a kidney, neatly labeled in blue and black ink. Elena Vasquez was studying medicine. He cleared his throat, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. She startled, nearly knocking over a ceramic mug. Her eyes widened, dark and luminous, and for the first time since she had entered his household 3 years ago, she looked at him, really looked. "I am sorry, sir," she stammered, rising so quickly the stool screeched against the tile. "I didn't mean to be here so late. I thought." "You're fine," Richard said quietly, raising a hand. "I was just coming for water." She moved to gather her books. "I'll clean this up right away." "You don't have to." He stepped forward, filling a glass at the dispenser. His eyes glanced down at the open book. "What are you working on?" Her hands paused mid-page. She looked down, almost embarrassed. "Entrance exams," she said softly. "For an online pre-med program. I study after work, can't afford classes during the day. If I pass this exam, I might qualify for a scholarship." He noticed the wear on the books, the dog-eared pages, the colored ink, the calluses on her fingers from more than just chores. "You want to be a nurse?" She lifted her chin. "A doctor." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. In her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time. Purpose. Without another word he nodded, set down his glass, and walked away. But he didn't sleep that night. Instead, Richard Blackwood stood at his window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden paths. Something in him stirred, something he couldn't name. The next morning, he asked Jeffries, his house manager, "How long has Ms. Vasquez been working here?" 3 years and 2 months, Jeffries replied promptly. "No issues. Quiet, reliable. sends most of her earnings back to family in Arizona. That night, and the one after, Richard found himself wandering toward the staircase again at 2:15 a.m., not out of thirst, but out of something deeper. Each time, he saw the light beneath the door, the sound of whispered vocabulary, the faint scrape of pencil on paper. He didn't open the door again, but he listened. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like it was holding its breath. 4 days later, he overheard her. She was on the phone, the voice muffled but trembling. "No, Mama, I haven't told them. I can't. Not unless I pass. I know. I'm trying. I'm so tired, but I'm trying." He walked away before she saw him, but her words stayed lodged in his chest. That night, he sat down and wrote an email to his lawyer. Scholarship Fund. Anonymous framework request, he called it. The Hope Fund, named after his late wife, who used to say, "Some of the brightest minds will never shine, not because they lack talent, but because they were born in rooms with no windows." The fund covered full tuition, textbooks, lab materials, and a modest monthly stipend. No traceable connection, just a light placed in her path. When the letter of acceptance arrived, he didn't see it, but he saw what it did to her. Elena grew quiet, withdrawn. She moved through the house like a shadow. Her eyes no longer lit up in the hallway. Her smile, small as it had always been, vanished entirely. Until one evening, she knocked on the study door. She had never knocked before. I need to speak with you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, manila envelope in hand. He led her inside. She sat, back straight, fingers gripping the envelope like it held her whole life. "I got in," she whispered. "To the program," he smiled. "That's wonderful. There's a scholarship, full tuition, monthly support. No name. I see. Was it you?" He could have lied, but he didn't. "Yes. I'm grateful, Trudy, but I don't think I can accept it." "Why?" "My family," she said. "They rely on my income. My sister's epilepsy, my brother's school. If I stop working, even part-time, they lose everything." Richard, who had once negotiated billion-dollar deals, felt helpless for the first time in years. "You think stepping toward your dream is selfish?" he asked. "I think survival leaves no room for dreams." He stood pacing. "Elena, you've spent your life giving to a world that's never given back. If you give up this chance, you'll survive, yes, but you'll never live." Her eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. "I'm not asking you to abandon them, but maybe it's time someone else helped carry the weight." She placed the envelope between them. "I've never heard anyone say that to me before." That night, she packed her uniforms, her textbooks, a photo of her family. She whispered to the air, "I'm not leaving you. I'm doing this because of you." And just before dawn, she left. No one in the house stirred except Richard. He watched from the window as the girl who once folded his shirts and pressed his linens walked out of his world towards something she had earned on her own terms. And though the house remained unchanged, Richard knew one truth: nothing would ever be the same again. The day Elena arrived at the university housing, it rained. Not the soft, gentle kind of rain that whispered against windows, but the relentless kind. The kind that soaked your shoes before you made it to the first step. She stood outside the brick dormitory with her bag clutched tightly, her jacket clinging to her arms, and the folder of her acceptance letter held like a shield across her chest. No one noticed her. No one ever did. Inside, the room was even smaller than she imagined. One single bed, a desk, a shelf barely big enough to hold her books. The light buzzed overhead like it wasn't sure whether to flicker or die. But she smiled anyway, because it was hers. It was quiet, and for the first time, the quiet didn't belong to someone else. That night, she sat at the window and watched the city lights blur in the mist. The letter, creased and water-stained, rested on her lap. She read it again, though she already knew the words by heart. Then she opened her notebook and began to write. "Mr. Blackwood, I hope this finds you well. I wasn't sure if I should write, but something in me needed to let you know that I arrived safely, that I'm here. The program is more intense than I expected. I feel like I'm trying to sprint in a language I've only just learned to walk in. But I'm still moving, still breathing, still trying. I've never lived in a place this small before. My room barely fits the bed and desk, but when I sit at the window in the morning with my coffee and books, I feel rich, not in money, but in purpose. Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for seeing me. I don't know what else to say except that I won't waste it. She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it the next morning before her first class. She didn't expect a reply. She wasn't even sure if he would read it, but it felt right. Richard received the letter 2 days later. He recognized the handwriting the moment Jeffries brought it into his study. He opened it carefully, like it might crumble in his hands, and when he finished reading, he placed it in the top drawer of his desk, flat, unfolded, as if to preserve the weight of every word. He didn't respond. He couldn't. It wasn't his story anymore. But that night, he stood longer than usual by the camellias on the east wall, the ones she had mentioned once, almost in passing. They were wilting now, touched by frost, yet a few still bloomed. And in that quiet, surrounded by shadows and scent, he understood something he never had before. She hadn't just left. She had taken a piece of the house with her, a piece that could no longer be unseen. Elena's first semester was a war zone of syllabi, scientific terminology, and exhaustion. Her classmates were younger, most fresh from private high schools. Their backpacks matched. Their laptops glowed with stickers of tech companies and internships. They asked questions in class like they already knew the answers. She didn't. She just listened, took notes, arrived early, stayed late. She tutored in the evenings to make extra money, mostly biology and chemistry. She helped a boy named Jamal understand cellular respiration using a story about car engines and trees. He passed his midterm. He cried when he saw the grade. He wasn't the only one. Each week, she sent money home, just enough to cover Sarah's epilepsy medication and Miguel's school fees. The rest she stretched. Groceries were ramen and frozen spinach. Her shoes had holes by the 3rd month. Her coat never quite zipped all the way up, but she didn't complain. She had chosen this, and when she ached, when the nights felt too heavy, she wrote. The second letter was shorter. Had my first anatomy quiz. Didn't fail. Didn't ace it either, but didn't fail. That matters more than I thought it would. Found a library that stays open late. The woman at the desk knows me now. She gives me leftover tea from the break room. Small kindnesses make the world less sharp. I hope the camellias are still blooming on the east wall. I always liked those. Richard read it at his desk with the afternoon light casting long golden lines across the room. He didn't smile, not fully, but something around his eyes softened. He pinned it above the first letter, and when he passed the east wall later that day he paused, stared at the last 2 blooms clinging to their stems, one white, one pale pink. Brave, stubborn things, just like her. The 3rd letter came with a photo. Elena standing with 3 other students in scrubs, smiling shyly in front of a faded science building. The photo was blurry, the print was poor, but it glowed with something more vivid than color. On the back, study group. I taught them how to diagram a heart today. One of them said I explained things better than our professor. I cried later in the bathroom. Not because I was sad, just because it felt real. This might actually happen. Thank you. Richard held the photo for a long time, and for the first time in years, he said the words out loud to an empty room that finally didn't feel so empty. You're going to make it. Elena didn't know what she was to him now. Not an employee, not exactly a friend. Something else, something quieter but deeply real. She didn't expect him to reply, and he never did, but she kept writing anyway, because somewhere in that mansion, behind the polished oak doors and cold chandeliers, there was a man who had seen her when she was invisible. And she would not forget that. By the time her second semester began, Elena had developed a rhythm, tight, deliberate, and unrelenting. She rose each morning before the sun. Coffee, flashcards, a moment of prayer pressed between breaths. She kept a quote from a textbook taped to her mirror. "You are not behind. You are simply building from a deeper place." And it was true, because for every step her classmates took on paved roads, Elena was walking barefoot through brambles, carrying not just books but memories. Of her mother folding laundry under broken ceiling fans, of nights when hunger became a quiet roommate, of mornings she skipped school to stay home with Sarah when the sieges got worse. Now, in these university halls, lined with confidence and entitlement, she walked differently, not with arrogance but with earned purpose. Still, it wasn't easy. There were days she wanted to quit. Days when her hands shook so badly during lab that she could barely hold the scalpel. Days when a professor looked through her instead of at her. Days when her tutoring students didn't show up and the grocery money ran short. But then the letters would come, not from Richard, he still never replied, but from home. Sarah's latest drawing, a lopsided sunflower with Felina scribbled in crayon beneath it. A short note from her mother. The medicine arrived. God bless whoever sent it. Keep going, Mija. Elena taped those to the inside of her closet door. On the other side of the country, in the quiet study of an old mansion, Richard had started a ritual of his own. Each morning, he would sit with his coffee, black, no sugar, and reread one of her letters, sometimes twice. He never admitted aloud how much they meant, but he had begun making space for them, literally and otherwise. The corkboard in his study now held over a dozen pages, folded, faded, but full of life. Beneath them sat a small glass dish filled with loose petals from the camellias Elena once mentioned. He didn't know why he kept them, only that he couldn't throw them away. One crisp Thursday afternoon, a new envelope arrived. Inside was a certificate. Academic Excellence in Advanced Pathophysiology. The name Elena Vasquez printed in bold serif across the top. No message this time, just the award and a note scribbled in the margin. I almost didn't walk up to receive this. The professor called my name twice. I still feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's future, but I went anyway. Richard framed it, hung it directly beside her first letter. Later that night, when Jeffries passed the study and paused at the door, he saw the wall, no longer a wall, but a story unfolding in pinned fragments, and smiled quietly. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. One evening, Elena stayed late after her hospital rotation. It had been a grueling 12-hour day shadowing ER nurses. She'd held a hand through a miscarriage, cleaned a wound so deep it made her knees weak, translated for a Spanish-speaking father whose son had broken 3 ribs and couldn't breathe properly. And still she stayed after, wiping down counters, restocking gloves, helping a janitor she barely knew carry trash bags to the dumpster. "You're not paid to do that," one of the residents said, watching her from behind a clipboard. Elena looked at her calmly. "I wasn't paid to get here either." She left the hospital at midnight, shoes soaked with melting snow, and walked the 9 blocks back to her apartment. Her hands were raw, her eyes heavy, her spirit trembling on the edge of doubt. But when she opened her mailbox, a small brown envelope was waiting. There was no return address. Inside was a prepaid card, a typed note attached, for new shoes and warm meals, for the work no one sees. She didn't need to wonder where it came from. She sat on the edge of her bed and cried quiet, exhausted tears, not from sadness, but from the unspeakable grace of being seen. Back at the estate, Richard had begun changing in ways so gradual even he barely noticed at first. He spoke less in meetings but listened more. He stopped correcting the florist's arrangements when they weren't symmetrical. Started asking the names of the gardeners. Donated quietly to a free clinic in Westside, Elena's old neighborhood. No public credit, no plaques, just supplies delivered monthly. He began mentoring her local youth business incubator, speaking to students whose zip codes had always excluded them from boardroom dreams. And when one of the students asked, "Why are you here, sir?" he said simply, "Because someone once gave me a reason to believe in second chances." He never said her name, but he carried it with him like a compass. By the middle of her third year, Elena had found her footing. She still doubted herself often, but the fear no longer defined her. She had earned the respect of professors, led study groups, helped 3 students apply to medical school from underrepresented backgrounds. Her tutoring hours funded Sarah's therapy now, not just her medication. She had even bought new shoes, the kind that didn't hurt after 12 hours on her feet. And then something unexpected happened. Her name was listed in a new mentorship program, one where third-year students helped international enrollees acclimate to the program. She hadn't applied. Someone had nominated her. When she walked into the orientation room, she hesitated. But the moment she began speaking about how to organize notes, how to balance sleep with survival, how to keep going when you feel unseen, the room leaned in. Afterward, a girl from Nepal pulled her aside. You make me feel like I can stay," she said. That night, Elena wrote a new letter. "They're letting me help now. Like really help, not just study or survive. I didn't think I had anything to offer, but maybe what I've carried can become a map for someone else." Richard read that line 3 times, then stared out the window for a long while, the letter still warm in his hand. Outside, the ivy on the estate walls had deepened to a dark crimson. Winter had passed, but the chill remained. Even the camellias had stopped blooming. And still the house felt alive. For the first time in years, it felt alive. Elena stepped into the small lecture hall just before the final presentation and paused for a moment at the threshold. The sunlight poured through tall glass windows, catching flecks of dust that danced in the air like restless thoughts. Her hands gripped a folder of patient notes, part real, part simulated. The presentation would be her last hurdle before clinical rotations. She had barely slept the night before. The night nurse at the assisted living facility, where she picked up weekend shifts, had called out, and Elena had taken the double shift minus 12 hours on her feet, then straight into prep for her exam. She had been living like this for nearly 3 years now, but today felt different. Because today, she wasn't surviving. Today, she was proving. She walked slowly to the front of the room, her eyes catching on a familiar quote etched onto a plaque by the podium. "In the quiet moments, we discover what we are made of." The irony made her smile. She began her presentation calmly, confidently. The case, a pediatric patient presenting with recurring infections and poor growth. Her classmates fidgeted with pens and flipped through notes, but Elena didn't glance down once. Her voice was even, her knowledge earned. When she reached the final slide and paused, there was a moment of silence. Then applause, not just the polite academic kind, but real, sustained clapping. Her professor nodded slowly. "You're going to make an exceptional doctor, Ms. Vasquez." She bowed her head, too full to speak. But inside her chest, something let go. A grip that had held her heart hostage for years. That evening, she sat in her apartment with a cup of chamomile tea and a soft breeze curling through the open window. Her phone buzzed, an email from the university. She'd been awarded a clinical rotation at St. Catherine's Community Hospital in Brooklyn. Her first choice. She closed her eyes and let the tears come. Quiet, slow, not from fear, but from finally reaching the doorway of a dream she once couldn't even say out loud. She wrote another letter. "Mr. Blackwood, they said I have hands like a surgeon. Steady, focused. I never thought I would hear something like that in my lifetime. Next month, I begin my rotation in Brooklyn. It's a small community hospital, nothing glamorous. But they see people who don't get seen anywhere else. It feels right. I've begun to notice something. I no longer feel like I'm pretending. I don't flinch when someone calls me doctor in training. I don't shrink when I speak. I walk into rooms like I belong. I think I'm becoming her, the woman I used to imagine when I was a kid. holding my father's hand as he passed. Thank you for giving her a chance to exist. Richard received the letter on a windy Tuesday. He read it by the window, the wind curling against the glass like breath. Something about the final line wouldn't let go of him. He sat down at his desk and pulled open the drawer where her letters were kept, now layered in neat, dog-eared sequence. He thought of Catherine again, his late wife, who used to say, "The most powerful things we build can't be touched. They live in people." And he realized he had helped build something extraordinary, not with money, but with belief. Weeks later, Elena stepped into the worn lobby of Street Catherine's. The building was old, its elevator creaked, the waiting chairs didn't match, but the place had a heartbeat. Patients lined the hallway, single mothers with toddlers, elderly couples with plastic bags of pill bottles, teenagers with injuries they didn't want to explain. Elena reported to the intake desk, introduced herself, and was led to the supervisor, a soft-spoken, sharp-eyed doctor named Marcus Powell. He glanced at her coat, her ID badge, then her eyes. "You look nervous," he said. "I am," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Means you care." From that day forward, she worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes 14. She rotated through pediatrics, internal medicine, urgent care. She translated for patients who spoke Spanish. She held hands, took vitals, helped a mother deliver a baby when the on-call OB got stuck in traffic. She stayed late, showed up early. Dr. Powell started calling her Dr. Vasquez when the residents weren't around. One night, a little boy came in, barely 6 years old, lips turning blue, his mother crying uncontrollably. The ER was short-staffed. The attending was in surgery, the nurses overwhelmed. Elena didn't hesitate. She assessed, moved quickly, gave oxygen, checked vitals, ordered a chest X-ray. By the time Dr. Powell arrived, she had stabilized the boy's airway. He looked at her and asked, "How did you know what to do?" She didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, "Because someone once believed I could." Later that night, when she walked out into the freezing air, her fingers were numb, but her spirit blazed. She sat on the bench by the bus stop and watched the traffic lights flicker in the distance. She pulled out her notebook. He couldn't breathe, but I did. And I stayed calm. I saw him. I moved. I helped. I didn't think about grades or titles or failures. I just became who I was supposed to be. She mailed the page the next morning. Richard didn't cry when he read that one, but he did take a long walk, through the garden, through the empty West Wing, through the music room his wife once filled with piano. When he returned to his study, he pinned the letter directly in the center of the board. Then he sat for a long time, staring at it, because, in those words, he couldn't breathe, but I did. He saw not just a victory, but a legacy. Not his. Hers. The months passed quickly at Street Catherine's. Elena moved through corridors like a quiet current, never demanding attention but impossible to ignore once you saw her work. She became the one nurses turned to when a chart didn't make sense, the one medical assistants whispered to when a patient's story didn't match the injury, the one who stayed behind to clean up after a difficult code, even when her shift ended hours ago. She still wore the same coat, still used the same pencil case from her first year, still called her mother every Sunday night, even if just to hear her voice. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer questioned if she belonged. She knew she did. One Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Elena stood by the window of the pediatric wing and watched a young girl paint with watercolors on a tray. The girl had been admitted for chronic asthma. Elena had sat with her 3 nights in a row when the wheezing returned, softly humming lullabies from her childhood. "She says you're her favorite doctor," a nurse whispered. Elena smiled. "I'm not a doctor yet." She doesn't care. That night, Elena returned to her tiny apartment and found a letter waiting, not from home, not from the university, but from the university board itself. She had been nominated for a Community Leadership Fellowship, a one-year funded opportunity to build a public health clinic in underserved neighborhoods. She stayed at the letter for a long time. Then she cried, not because she was overwhelmed, but because for the first time, someone had asked her to lead. She didn't write to Richard right away. She wanted to wait until she could speak clearly, not from shock, but from certainty. 2 weeks later, she mailed the letter. Mr. Blackwood, I've been offered something I never expected. An opportunity to design and open a small clinic in Brooklyn. 5 rooms, 1 waiting bench, a pharmacy. I don't know how to do this. I've never built anything beyond my own belief in this dream. But I'm going to try, because I think this is where I'm supposed to be now. Not just treating symptoms, but addressing silence. The kind of silence that nearly erased me before anyone knew I existed. The name of the clinic will be Alma. It means soul in Spanish. For the hands that hold. For the ones that heal. For the stories no one listens to until someone does. Thank you for listening first. Richard read that letter slowly, carefully, then again. He didn't move for a long time after. The room around him seemed to still, the air heavier, not oppressive, just full. He folded the letter, then reopened it, not to reread, but to feel. Because in that letter, he saw the entire arc of a life, the life of a girl who once whispered medical terms in the dark, and now spoke with the steadiness of someone who had become. The clinic took 9 months to open. 9 months of permits, inspections, failed wiring, cracked tiles, missing paperwork, budget cuts. 9 months of Elena holding plans in one hand and a stethoscope in the other. 9 months of meeting with suppliers who didn't take her seriously until she did the math in front of them. Of sitting with donors who asked how old she was and smiling through it all. She hired 2 nurses from the neighborhood, a part-time receptionist studying to be a social worker, and a retired physician who volunteered twice a week. He called her boss, and she never got used to it. Opening day came with no ribbon, no media, just a mother with 2 coughing kids, a grandfather with knee pain, a young woman too afraid to go to the hospital with a deep cut in her arm. Elena greeted each one with the same calm presence she once brought to marble floors and silver vases. She didn't ask for insurance. She asked, "Where does it hurt?" That night, after the clinic closed, she sat on the bench outside, beneath a mural painted by local children. Fingerprints turned into leaves on a tree, each with a name scribbled in paint. She rested her head back and let out a long, slow breath. She had done it. And then footsteps, not hurried, not hesitant. When she opened her eyes, Richard stood before her. He looked older, thinner, but somehow lighter too. She didn't rise. He sat beside her. Neither of them spoke, not at first. Around them, the city pulsed, traffic, music, laughter in the distance. But on that bench, time stilled. "I was nearby," he said. She smiled. "I figured. I didn't want to come inside." "It's yours too," she replied, "whether you admit it or not." He looked at the mural. "They think this place is magical." "They're not wrong." He looked at her then, truly looked. "Is it what you imagined?" "No," she whispered. "It's better." He reached out, slow, deliberate, and took her hand. It was warm, steady. No grand speeches, no decorations, just presence. The same way he once stood in the hallway and listened. The same way she once studied under a flickering light, believing no one saw her. Now they sat side by side, not as benefactor and recipient, but as people who had shaped one another in silence. He didn't stay long. When he rose to leave, she didn't stop him. But before he turned, he looked back. "Keep the light on," he said. She nodded. "I'd always do." Back at the estate, Richard walked into his study and looked at the wall of letters. Dozens now. Notes, drawings, a photocopied certificate, a grainy photo from Elena's first anatomy class, a typed thank you from a young patient's parent forwarded by Elena with one line. "This is why we keep going." He touched the edges of each page. His fingers, slower now, softer. The room didn't feel like his office anymore. It felt like a legacy, not the kind measured in net worth, but in worth itself. The worth of seeing someone and saying, "I believe you can." Elena never stopped writing, even when the clinic grew, even when the staff doubled, even when the waiting room overflowed and she barely had time to eat lunch. She still wrote, not every week, not even every month, but always when it mattered. A new patient who hugged her after getting care they never expected. A teenage volunteer who told her, "I want to be just like you." The day she was asked to speak at a citywide panel on healthcare equity. She wrote it all, and always ended the same way. "I haven't forgotten what brought me here, but I know now where I'm going." Richard died quietly 3 years later, in his sleep. No pain, no ceremony. In his will, there was only one personal request: that the board of the Hope Fund continue under the same name, anonymously, and direct future scholarships toward students like Elena Vasquez. At his funeral, there were very few guests. But one woman arrived late. White coat, name tag, a stethoscope around her neck. She stood at the back, didn't cry. She just whispered 2 words into the chapel air. "Thank you," then turned and walked back into a world still in need of light.